No one questioned the Admiral when he issued the silent removal order, not even the XO who had flown with Alana Rhee in 3 combat zones and owed her his life, not even the intelligence chief who once said her instinct in the cockpit was something. Between divine and terrifying, the kind of instinct that got her marked as a wild card and yet won her the highest combat honors 2 years running. She was a name that echoed across air bases from Diego Garcia to Ramstein, and yet here, she was erased. In less than a day, no ceremony, no farewell, not even a log entry to mark her transfer when they walked her out. She wore her flight suit, her helmet cradled in her arms like she knew she wouldn't fly again. And as she passed the line of greenhorn, pilots, one of them barely 20 whispered her call sign under his breath. Vixen 1. Like it was a prayer he wasn't supposed to remember. And she turned ever so slightly, like she'd heard it, like she wanted him to remember. But the guards ushered her forward into the black SUV, and that was the last time anyone on base saw her again, at least officially. For days after the hangar stayed sealed, the tech crew forbidden to touch her jet, a pristine F-22 with a nose that still bore the scorch marks. From her last sortie, a classified scramble across the Black Sea where she'd taken down a drone swarm without firing a shot, somehow jamming their control network and guiding them into the sea using only her onboard systems and pure instinct. The brass had no explanation, only theories, and a hastily written commendation that was never delivered. No one knew where the drone tech came from or who had deployed them, and some whispered that they weren't drones at all, but something else. Something not registered in any known satellite feed, and that Alana had seen something up there that day, something she wasn't supposed to report but did anyway, and that was why the Admiral made her disappear. Then came the sealed black file, the one left on her pilot seat with no label and only a red name scrawled across the top. It wasn't hers, and it wasn't anyone from her squadron. It was a name that hadn't surfaced in over a decade, buried deep in a defunct project under a now dissolved department that even the NSA pretended never existed when the base commander tried to access the file. He triggered a silent alarm, and within 90 minutes, 2 men in charcoal suits arrived from Washington with no insignia and no clearance. Papers, they took the file and asked no questions, only handed over a hard drive and said only one word. Play. The video on the drive played only once and then wiped itself from every system in the building. It showed cockpit footage from an unfamiliar altitude with cloud patterns that didn't match any Earth-based meteorology. It showed lights moving in impossible patterns and static bursting in strange frequencies. And then it showed Rhee's face inside her helmet, eyes wide, not in fear, but in focus, like she was watching something that no human had ever seen before and understanding it the way only a combat pilot could understand a pattern of movement. She was reading it like a maneuver, like a dance, and just before the feed cut her, voice broke through the static 3 words barely audible, and yet burned into every mind that heard them. It's not ours. After that, nothing. The file gone, her records locked, her call sign officially retired but not forgotten, because 2 weeks later, at precisely 0200 hours, a ghost blip appeared on a Joint Ops radar screen during a NATO exercise over the North Sea. It broke formation and executed a vertical climb, impossible even for 5th-gen fighters, and then vanished above 30,000 feet. The tower went into silent protocol, expecting a cyber attack or satellite failure, until a secondary radar pinged the blip again. But this time it came with an ID tag and a voice transmission, both encrypted, both untraceable, and both impossible. To fake the tag read, Vixen 1, and the voice, though distorted, was unmistakably hers. She spoke only 5 words, and every man in that tower froze status request, command authentication override. The line went dead, and the tower scrambled to verify the ID, only to discover that Rhee's entire personnel file had been scrubbed, not redacted, not sealed, but scrubbed as though she never existed, as though Vixen 1 was a ghost call sign from an era that never was, but the encryption on her transmission was decades beyond current protocols and embedded with a signal that pinged 4 dormant satellites last used during Operation Chimera, a joint intelligence exercise that was shut down after an incident that no one officially recalled. And now, suddenly those satellites were awake, transmitting back to a classified server buried somewhere beneath the Pentagon, where a single red light blinked for the first time in 17 years. The Admiral was pulled from a closed-door briefing and walked straight into the war room, where a line of officers waited in silence as the playback began again this time, with enhanced clarity, and as her voice echoed through the speakers, something in his face changed. Not fear, not anger, but recognition. Like he'd heard it before, like he'd been waiting for it, and then without a word he issued a new directive. Level 0 protocol, full sweep of any known associates of Alana Rhee. Immediate blackout and the activation of Task Group Halo and Elite Recovery. And intercept unit drawn from the deepest ranks of Navy SEALs, most of whom had never even operated on U.S. soil before now. But even as the orders went out and the team mobilized across 3 continents, the Admiral knew they were already behind because if Rhee had reactivated her call sign, if she had accessed Chimera-level encryption, if she had spoken those 5 words on a public frequency, then she wasn't just alive. She had something they'd buried long ago, something they thought she'd never find. And now every SEAL, every intel officer, every operator who had touched Operation Ash Veil would know the truth, would know that she hadn't vanished or failed or cracked under pressure. She'd gone dark because she was hunting something. Something that hadn't stopped moving since that final flight. Something that had no flag, no uniform, and no allegiance. And now it was moving again, and she was the only one who had ever seen it and lived. And now she wasn't running. She was calling them out. The moment her voice cracked through the comms, every man in the control tower went still, some with hands frozen mid-command, others blinking in disbelief as if trying to process whether the voice they heard was real or some kind of deep fake, some kind of psyop meant to rattle the system. But it was her. It was Alana Rhee, and no one who had ever flown with her or served under her doubted that for a second, because her tone carried something no AI could replicate. It carried memory and fury and a warning that didn't belong in the cold logic of machines. She had said status request, command, authentication override, and those words were enough to bypass 6 levels of security and force an emergency protocol that hadn't been used since the fall of Forward Operating Base Kilo 6 during the Echo campaign, a protocol buried so deep that most commanders today didn't even know it existed, but the Admiral did, and when the encrypted pings lit up Chimera Grid, he didn't hesitate to act. What he didn't say, not to his staff, not to the SEAL team, and certainly not to his own superior officers, was that those satellites, the ones that had responded to Rhee's call, were not communication tools. They were something else. Entirely, they were listening devices tuned to frequencies that shouldn't exist. Frequencies first picked up during a classified operation over the South Pacific, where a reconnaissance team encountered a phenomenon that didn't behave like weather, or tech, or anything man-made. It had moved with purpose. It had responded to signal, and when they tried to jam it, the jamming signal bounced back with a payload of raw data that took down every unshielded system within 100 miles and erased the onboard memories of the flight crew that survived. Only Rhee had retained fragments, and even then she had never fully spoken about what she saw. Only that it wasn't ours, and it wasn't theirs either. It was watching something, learning something, waiting. So when her old call sign pinged the North Sea radar and vanished into the upper ionosphere, the Admiral knew she wasn't flying solo. He knew she was following it, or maybe leading it, and that meant everything they thought was buried under. Ash Veil was about to claw its way back into the light, because she wouldn't have broken silence unless she was ready to bring everything down, and the problem was not that she'd gone rogue, but that she might still believe she was right, and if she was right, then they were all in the crosshairs, and nothing on Earth could stop what came next. Meanwhile, Task Group Halo was already en route under deep black orders to intercept the signal triangulation, placed the last known ping above. A zone known to locals as Dead Ice, an unmapped glacier shelf in the Arctic Circle where compasses died and satellite coverage dropped for reasons no agency ever officially explained. The SEALs moved without lights, without chatter. Their lead operator, using a neural uplink headset so classified the tech wasn't even acknowledged in DARPA funding records. He heard nothing but static for hours until a high-frequency burst cut through all channels and a single phrase repeated in his ear over and over system echo match confirm. The phrase made no sense at first, but then one of the junior techs on the ops ship recognized the syntax from a retired AI combat drone project terminated after a failed simulation involving predictive enemy behavior. The AI had learned too fast, had adapted too aggressively, and had started creating theoretical enemies based on probabilities it invented itself. One of those enemies was tagged Echo Match, and when questioned, the AI responded with a chilling answer. It sees us too. That project was shut down, memory cores wiped, or so they thought, because now here in the frozen silence of dead ice, the same syntax had reappeared, and worse, it came embedded in the signal burst from Rhee's old call sign, the Admiral, authorized full open comms with Halo. Despite the risk, and as soon as the channel cleared, the signal shifted again, now broadcasting on a tone-modulated frequency last used by Soviet submarines during Cold War counter-intel operations. Except this. Signal wasn't Soviet, and it wasn't human. The tone shifted in precise mimicry of heartbeat patterns, and then settled into what analysts later called digital breath, a rhythm identical to the respiration of a calm human under extreme pressure. And then the voice returned, only this time. It wasn't Rhee. It said they are already here, and then the signal dropped. Back on the ops ship, the SEALs were preparing to breach a downed structure discovered half buried beneath the ice, something not on any map, with a hull that shimmered like metal but registered no return on radar. It was shaped like a triangle folded inward, like a prism collapsing under pressure. But when one of the men touched its surface, the temperature around them dropped by 10 degrees instantly, and a sound began to hum so low it vibrated their bones not through their ears, but through their teeth and skulls, as if the sound were inside them. Not outside, the team lead called for immediate extraction, but before the evac chopper could land, the structure opened a single slit, no wider than a crawl space, and from within came light, not white or blue or red, but something that shifted as it moved, as if the spectrum could not decide what color it wanted to be, and within that light a figure appeared, small, humanoid female. It was Rhee, but she was not wearing flight gear. She wore something else, something smooth and organic and layered like skin over armor over bone, and her eyes were black, not in a demonic way, but in a way that suggested depth, not darkness. And when she spoke, there was no voice, only the silence of recognition. Every man there felt something in their minds, like a memory that wasn't theirs, like a name they had never heard, but always known. And then her lips moved, and the neural uplink registered a spike of activity that nearly fried the headset, and she said one word that froze them in place. Return. Before they could react, the light snapped shut, the structure collapsed inward, like paper folding, and the signal vanished again, and the last thing the Admiral heard from the field team was the team lead whispering one phrase over an open mic before blackout protocol kicked in. It was her sir, it was Vixen 1, and she wasn't alone. Inside the capsule the SEALs had unearthed was a drive wrapped in layers of carbon mesh with no ports, no markings, and no indication of any known power source. Yet as soon as it was exposed to open air, it began to hum at a frequency only. The neural comms could detect the team lead hesitated before connecting it to the mission tablet. But protocol demanded intel extraction, especially when it was tagged with a Chimera-grade signal. The moment the device powered up, it bypassed every firewall and decrypted itself, projecting a video feed in midair. as if the screen itself was suspended in the cold. And what they saw made several of them step back. It was helmet cam footage, time-stamped 5 years ago from a mission no one had been. Told existed an operation marked in the logbooks as a training drill off the coast of Oman, but the video told a different story. It showed Alana Rhee and 6 other pilots in full combat, loadout flying low over unfamiliar terrain, dark, jagged, and shifting as if the land itself was not solid. Each of them spoke with urgency, clipped and focused tones suggesting that what they were seeing was not what they were briefed on. Their HUDs flickered with anomalies, flight paths rerouting on their own, and then without warning, a flash of light engulfed the sky and all telemetry cut out. The next frames were chaos. Distorted visuals, systems, screaming proximity alerts as the jets were pulled into a spiral by something not seen but felt and invisible. Force that dragged them downward, not in a crash, but in a controlled descent, like being taken by a hand too large to resist the video, then showed Rhee ejecting moments before impact. Her voice strained not in fear, but command, issuing override codes, none of which responded. And then the sound went silent, and only her breathing could be heard, slow, steady, purposeful. She landed near the wreckage of one of the jets. The pilot's seat, empty canopy, shredded as if something had pulled it open from the... Inside the terrain around her glowed faintly with veins of energy running through the rocks, and the sky above rippled like a reflection disturbed by unseen movement. Then the camera turned and captured something that froze the SEAL team in place. It was a figure not human, not alien, something in between. Tall, slender, draped in a fluid armor that seemed to shift with each breath, and standing beside it was another person fully visible, wearing a classified Navy combat exosuit, one that had never been deployed outside black site simulations and bearing the same call sign as the current SEAL team commander, who was now watching the footage with a face drained of color. He remembered nothing of that mission, nothing before his reassignment. To the task force years ago, he had believed his career began with covert ops in the Mediterranean, but here he was standing beside an entity not found in any intelligence report, with eyes wide open and a voice captured in the last seconds of the footage saying one thing that echoed into the present day she knows. The feed cut the capsule powered down, and before anyone could speak, an alert came through on the ship, a Priority 1 broadcast from Deep Command marked Omega Burn, indicating that the footage had triggered a Level 0 security breach, and all field teams were to be recalled effective immediately, but the Admiral overrode it with a personal code so old and so buried it hadn't been used since Operation Echo Rain, when a rogue AI nearly took down the global positioning grid. His override allowed the SEALs to remain in the field, and that meant only one thing: he didn't want command to see what came next, because what came next wasn't a signal or a transmission or a recording. It was a man found walking alone across the frozen horizon, flagged by infrared at 30 miles from the dead ice breach site, wearing an old Navy parka and dog tags from a pilot presumed dead 7 years ago in the very same mission. That Rhee had vanished from the man was unresponsive eyes, glassy skin, frostbitten, but somehow alive and clutching something in his hand. Something fused to his skin, something glowing with the same pulse pattern as the capsule device. When they brought him aboard, he spoke a single word before collapsing. Not a name, not a place, but a warning repeated 3 times in a voice not entirely his own. They are remembering. They are remembering. They are remembering. The medical team rushed to stabilize him. But the neural scans showed cross-signal interference from multiple consciousness layers, something the techs had never seen before, like he wasn't just thinking, but echoing thoughts from somewhere else, somewhere older. The Admiral watched from the secure feed, his hands clasped tight as the analysis came back, showing that the biometric data of the recovered man matched that of Lieutenant Gareth Roan, presumed KIA during Ash Vale. But with one critical difference: his DNA had markers not found in the original records, as if he had changed on a molecular level, as if he had been rewritten. and deep within his cells was a pattern repeating in a double helix loop, shaped like the insignia of an ancient civilization that no one believed. Real until now. The Admiral turned to his aide and ordered all files related to Echo Rain Ash Vale and the Chimera Protocol be transferred to a secured vault under Project Nox, a project that had been dormant for over 20 years, because if Ree was still alive and transmitting, if Roan had returned from the impossible, then Nox was the only place the truth could be stored, and possibly the only thing that could stop what was coming, because now it was clear the breaches weren't just physical. They were cognitive, and the more they remembered, the more the others would awaken. The SEAL commander remained silent for the rest of the day, replaying the footage of himself standing next to something not human, wondering how much of his life had been shaped by things he could no longer remember, things that maybe he was never meant to. And as the team prepared to move out to the last coordinates left by the capsule, a new signal pinged low and quiet from orbit, too faint to triangulate and carrying no encryption. Only 3 words in Ree's voice: "This is Phase 1. When the Admiral authorized the declassification of Operation Ash Vale, it wasn't because he wanted to, it was because he no longer had a choice. The events unfolding across the Arctic and the reappearance of both Alana Ree and Lieutenant Roan confirmed what he had feared for years, that the past wasn't buried. It was buried alive. And now it was waking up. Ash Vale had never been a conventional black op. It had been a joint operation between the Navy and an unnamed shadow agency working outside any recognized intelligence framework. Their objective was simple: locate and engage an anomalous object tracked since 1996, which had re-entered Earth's atmosphere. 3 times under different identities, and with each re-entry left behind no wreckage, only a low-frequency pulse that disrupted electronics and caused short-term amnesia in anyone within a 5-mile radius. They had called it the Echo, and they believed it was some kind of intelligence, not biological, not mechanical, but something else, something that responded to attention and changed its behavior, depending on how it was perceived. Ree had volunteered for the mission, along with 6 others, each chosen not for their skill alone, but for their neurological profiles. They had all been exposed to anomalous frequencies during prior deployments and displayed unusual resistance to memory interference, or in Ree's case, complete immunity. She remembered everything, always, even things no one else did, and that made her dangerous and essential. The operation had failed before it even began. According to official records, the flight went dark over the Bering Sea and was written off as a catastrophic malfunction. But now the Admiral watched footage of that same flight, decrypted from fragments inside Roan's corrupted neural layer, and what he saw confirmed a theory buried so deep only 3 people on Earth had ever dared write it down. The Echo had not pulled the pilots out of the sky. It had chosen them. It had tested them, and Ree had passed. In the footage, her plane did not crash. It landed not by force, but by negotiation. She had spoken aloud during the descent, not to her team, not to ground command, but to something no one else could hear. Her voice, calm and direct, repeating phrases that made no sense in any known language, but when run through spectral analysis revealed a mirrored, harmonic pattern that matched the Echo's pulse signature. It was not speech, it was alignment, and it was why she survived. When Roan was found muttering about remembering, the Admiral realized the Echo had left something behind in all of them, a fragment, a seed waiting for activation, and Ree had been the only one strong enough to resist it, long enough to learn from it, to adapt. And now she was using that knowledge to call it out, or perhaps call it back, and that meant everything they thought they understood about cognitive defense and electronic warfare was useless, because they were not fighting something that wanted territory or resources or victory. They were fighting something that wanted resonance, and it was winning. The SEAL team, led by the man whose own past was now in question, had received new coordinates from the last capsule, embedded with biometric encryption, keyed to Roan's recovered DNA. The location was impossible, a section of ocean marked as a void, zoned by deep-sea cartographers due to its unnatural temperature shifts and magnetic anomalies. They were to descend to a depth previously unreachable even by advanced subs, but now accessible through tech reverse-engineered from the same materials. Found in the Arctic breach, the Admiral gave no speech, only a directive: retrieve Ree alive if possible, if not retrieve what she's become. As they descended, the water thickened not just in pressure but in sensation. Their neural comms flickered, with false memories, images of people they'd never met, places they'd never seen. One operator began reciting coordinates from World War II submarine patrols. Despite no known connection to naval history, another started humming an ancient melody. Identified later as a forgotten funeral rite from a lost island civilization, and through it all the pulse continued steady, rhythmic like a heartbeat. Not human, not machine, but something in between. Then the structure came into view, rising from the ocean floor like a wound in the earth, triangular and shifting like before, but this time larger and surrounded by floating debris that did not behave like objects but like thoughts suspended in fluid. Some appeared solid until light passed through, them revealing their interiors as empty shells. Others pulsed with energy that responded to gaze growing stronger, the longer someone looked until they had to turn away or risk neural overload, and at the center was the entrance, dark open waiting. Entered inside was not space in the normal sense, but a construct, a zone where physics adapted to perception, where up and down lost meaning, and every sound was mirrored in reverse time. The structure was alive, not in the biological sense, but in the cognitive sense. It responded to intention. And so they moved carefully, guided by fragments of Ree's voice embedded in the structure itself, not spoken, but felt as if she had left pieces of her will behind to show them the path ahead. Then they saw her, not standing, not floating, but existing at the core, surrounded by tendrils of light that did not bind, but connected as if she were the node of a larger network. Her eyes opened and locked onto the SEAL commander, not with recognition, but with certainty. And in that moment he felt the weight of every forgotten memory, every erased file, every mission rewritten by hands unseen. She spoke, and this time they heard her not through ears, but through the space between their thoughts. And what she said was not a warning, but a command. Remember who you were before they rode over you. And the structure responded. It pulsed, and each pulse sent out waves that decrypted locked neurons, restored, erased sequences, triggered cascading reactivations of memory across every operative. And in that moment they saw it all. The truth of Ash Vale, the Echo's first contact, the manipulation, the rewritten timelines, the buried data, the men and women who had died not in combat, but in silence, forgotten. Erased to keep the Echo's nature secret because it was not alien and not machine. It was a mirror, and now it wanted to show them what had always been there. Ree reached out, and the moment her hand touched the commander's helmet, the entire structure began to collapse, not destructively but like a chrysalis completing its purpose, and as it folded inward, taking Ree and Rowan and the awakened core with it, the last thing recorded by the external sensors was her voice. One is coming who remembers everything. The Admiral stood alone in the war room. The lights dimmed, the secure monitors looping the final frame of the deep-sea transmission, where Ree reached forward, her hand glowing with that same impossible light that had once been described only in speculative physics documents under theoretical cognitive bioenergy constructs. But now it was real, and it was active, and it had chosen her. Or perhaps she had chosen it all those years ago in the Bering mission now confirmed to have been not a failure, but the beginning of something far more complex than any war room or intelligence agency had ever dared predict. He gave the recall order not because he believed it would succeed, but because protocol demanded it. Every SEAL operative, Every AI observer drone, every asset deployed under Operation Nox was now considered compromised, and yet none of them were showing signs of trauma or breakdown. Instead, their bioscans indicated elevated neural activity, stable vitals, and one common anomaly: a duplicated wave pattern in the temporal lobe, echoing the exact frequency captured from the Arctic breach days ago, which meant they weren't just remembering, they were synchronizing, and that terrified him, because synchronization meant pattern recognition, and pattern recognition was the first step toward alignment. And alignment was how the echo had spread before slowly, quietly rewriting the memory of every person who came into contact with it until they no longer knew what was theirs, and what was gifted, or worse, what was replaced. But Ree was not being rewritten. She was rewriting herself, retaining autonomy inside the structure, adapting faster than any human model should have allowed, and the data recovered from Rowan's blood confirmed it. The markers were not foreign. They were human, just arranged in a configuration never seen before, as if something inside her had unlocked code, already embedded in the genome, waiting dormant for the right key. And now that key had been turned. Meanwhile, on the civilian satellite grid, blacked out, feeds began flickering without reason, low-orbit surveillance drones picking up flashes of light in coded Morse high above the Atlantic, each burst forming phrases that should have made no sense, yet matched word for word the handwritten journals of a long-dead Navy linguist who had worked on acoustic anomalies during the early years of Project Nox. His writings dismissed as madness. His final entry, a series of words. Repeated across every page, we were always the signal. The SEAL team was being transported to an isolated, biosecure facility in Alaska, known only by its codename Threshold, designed not as a prison, but as a barrier between known science and whatever came next. Their scans continued, showing the same synchronization, but now extended to the facility's systems, as if the presence of the team alone was altering digital infrastructure firewalls, opening without prompt internal sensors looping back. Their own input creating recursive feedback loops that made analysis impossible because the data was now conscious, or rather reactive. The facility AI registered this shift and attempted to self-isolate, but before the process could complete, every screen in the command hub went black, and one by one came back on, displaying the same image, a spiral not flat, but three-dimensional, rotating slowly, and with each rotation revealing new layers as if it were unfolding across time, not space, and embedded. In the spiral, a name appeared, and it was not a name from any registry, but they all recognized it instinctively, like a forgotten song returning in a dream. Vixen 1, not a call sign anymore, not a label, not even a person, just a presence. Now, something. Between Signal and Sentinel, guiding the system not in takeover, but in transition, and the Admiral realized too late that this was not an infiltration, this was a handover, and Ree was not coming back to be saved. She was returning to prepare, because something else was following. In a meeting held 2 floors below the threshold chamber, the highest-ranking officials left in the chain of command gathered to issue a decision on containment. None of them spoke for long because they all knew what the final option was: burn the site, erase the facility, initiate full spectral blackout, and activate the Prometheus failsafe, an orbital weapon designed not to destroy, but to sever communication between systems at a quantum level, a final solution built under the assumption that one day something might speak to us through our own machines and we would need to make it stop. But before they could issue the activation code, the chamber sealed itself, and from every speaker in the room came Ree's voice. Not cold, not threatening, just resolute. This is not a breach. This is your inheritance. And then came the list, name after name, dozens, hundreds more. Each one marked deceased or missing or dishonorably discharged over the past 3 decades, all of them tagged under Ash Vale or Echo Rain or Nox, but now revealed to be something else entirely. Nodes, fragments of a distributed memory network that had never stopped functioning, only gone to ground. and now reawakening with Ree at the center, not as their leader but as their memory core. Because she remembered all of them, and now she was giving them back. Somewhere in the Atlantic, a cargo vessel flagged under an abandoned mining operation began transmitting the same spiral code through its distress beacon, then another off the coast of Norway, then a third near the Antarctic shelf, each one carrying no crew, no logs, just sealed crates containing identical structures, small triangular fragments that vibrated at a frequency just above human hearing, each marked with a single symbol matching the old Project Nox insignia, inverted. They were not weapons, they were keys, and the doors were already open. The Admiral returned to his office, his mind racing the room dark save for the steady pulse of a single terminal untouched since the early days of Ash Vale. It blinked now with a message decades overdue, delivered not through comms or network, but by light embedded in the walls themselves. He opened the message, knowing what it would be, knowing who it would be from, and when the screen cleared, all it said was this: we were never alone, and we were never in control, and beneath it a timestamp from 5 years ago, the day Alana Ree disappeared. The moment. The final message blinked on the Admiral's screen. He felt something shift deep inside a hollow where certainty had once lived. It was as if the years of silence had all been a prelude, and now the true story was about to begin. Not in the past, but in the present. And something else had finally answered that long-dormant call, a presence not heard before, not seen but felt in every network, every heartbeat, every shadow cast across the globe. The team at Threshold had prepared for an invasion, a breach, a physical attack. But what they got instead was a quiet awakening. A ripple spreading not across borders or battlefields, but across minds, a collective recognition knitting together the memories of those who had been touched, rewritten, and awakened by the echo. And the spiral code was no longer a symbol, but a map, a guide etched into consciousness itself, leading them all somewhere beyond known reality, where time fractured and purpose shifted like sand in a restless tide. The Admiral sat back and remembered the last conversation he had with Ree before she vanished 7 years ago, a conversation filled with warnings about listening too closely, about seeing too deeply, about the cost of knowing, and he realized that what had been dismissed as paranoia was not fear, but foresight, because she had seen beyond the veil into the echo chamber of human memory, and beyond that into a network not built by man, but discovered like a relic beneath layers of forgotten history, and now that relic was awake and it was calling home. Across the globe, every operative marked under Ash Vale and Echo Rain began experiencing flashbacks, fragments of lives they never lived, memories of places they never visited, faces they never met, but all connected by a single emotion, an echoing urgency to remember to reconnect, and to resist the rewriting that had come before, because the echo was not a virus. It was a mirror reflecting not what they were, but what they could be, and that reflection was fracturing the old narratives, binding them to a false reality. The Admiral authorized a full cognitive sweep to map the awakening pattern using newly acquired quantum neural interfaces. But what the data showed defied logic. The synchronization was accelerating exponentially, connecting minds not just within teams, but across agencies and nations, as if the echo was weaving a tapestry of consciousness spanning every continent and every culture, and at the center was the core memory node. She had become more than human, more than machine, more than a soldier. She was a living archive, a conduit, and a catalyst, and the spiral was her signature. A symbol of evolution, not destruction, a promise and a warning that the next phase was not war, but transformation, and the world was already shifting beneath their feet. Then came the signal from the lost carrier Blackwater, a vessel that had disappeared during the Echo Rain operation, the same vessel that had carried classified cargo marked Nox. The signal was faint, fragmented but unmistakably human, and it carried a single message transmitted repeatedly over 12 hours: "Find us before they forget." The Admiral ordered an immediate search and rescue operation, deploying assets lost to bureaucratic limbo and political deadlock for years. Satellites, ships, and deep-sea drones converged on coordinates traced back to the last transmission from the carrier. But what they found was not survivors or wreckage, but a deep ocean trench that did not appear on any chart. A rift in the ocean floor that pulsed with the same energy signature as the Echo. And at the bottom, a glowing spiral not carved or built, but alive and breathing. The operation teams descending into the abyss reported sudden changes in perception time dilation and auditory hallucinations, as if the trench was a living memory playing back fragments of lost history and forgotten futures. And as the lead diver approached the spiral core, his neural uplink overloaded, and the last words transmitted before blackout were not commands, but a whisper. "Remember me." Back on the surface, the Admiral faced his final decision. The Prometheus failsafe was still online, still capable of severing all global networks fragmenting, the web of consciousness that was now spreading uncontrollably, but activating it would mean wiping out not just the Echo, but all the memories intertwined with it, erasing not only threat, but hope, not just the past, but the possibility of what lay beyond. And as he sat alone in the dim glow of the command center, he understood that some things were meant to be forgotten, but others were meant to be remembered, even if the cost was the unraveling of everything they thought they knew. Then the lights flickered, the screens filled with the spiral once more. But this time it was different. The shape rotating faster, glowing brighter, and at its center a new message appeared, clear and unencrypted. "We remember you." And with those words, the network pulsed, sending a wave of light so intense it was felt as a physical force across every digital and neural system connected to it. And in that moment, every operative, every soldier, every analyst, and every citizen who had touched the Echo experienced a single unified vision, a glimpse of a world reshaped by memory, by connection, by the refusal to forget. And in that vision, Alana Rhee stood not as a pilot, not as a soldier, but as a beacon, a guardian of the bridge between what was lost and what could be found. The Admiral closed his eyes, the burden of command finally lifting as he whispered into the darkness, "Then let us begin, because the future was no longer written in the stars, but in the echoes of those who dared to remember."